Hey, Mike here with Canadian Musician. Right now at the Rivoli Pool Hall in downtown. This fellow next to me just walked down the street from the CTV building in town doing a bunch of press. It is, of course, Adrian Sutherland, frontman of the roots rock band out of Northern Ontario, Midnight Shine. Well, there's a whole lot about your background, Adrian, we'll get into. I don't want to give it away in the intro here, but one thing folks familiar with Midnight Shine know for sure is that Adrian is from the remote fly-in Indigenous community of excuse me, I don't usually screw it, Attawapiskat. Right. There we go. And Adrian, you're saying you just got into town last night, but what's the logistics of even getting here for things like this?
Well, I got on flight yesterday, 6:00 p.m. from Attawapiskat direct to Timmins, which was nice actually. And I caught a connection from there to Toronto, so I got into my accommodations just a little after midnight. So 4 hours, which is not bad. The service is getting better, that's for sure.
Thanks for making some time in your schedule. You got a bunch done, I guess, today and over the next few days. I believe the rest of the band is flying in tonight to join you for film a session at the CBC and such.
Yeah, that's correct. I know it's always crazy when we come to the city. We try to cram everything in as much as possible.
So I should say, your latest album, third album, is now out, came out in the spring of this year, called High Road, follow-up to your previous two, the self-titled and Northern Man. Those two albums came pretty kind of back-to-back, or only a year apart or so, if I remember. I think it was like 2013, 2014, the self-titled, and then Northern Man came out. It's been now, I guess, 4 years since then, or between then and when High Road came out. So I guess it's just because I know your fellow band members, you all live in the James Bay area of Northern Ontario, but you're all in different remote Indigenous communities up there. Is it just the logistics, other life things going on, or why the longer wait between albums this time around?
Well, yeah, the first two albums came pretty quick. They were almost back to back. I think probably within the same year we recorded and released them, if I recall correctly. And then we got derailed after the second album. We got ourselves into some poor business decisions, so that really slowed things down for us. But we since have been kind of rebuilding and get everything back on track now, which is really something we're pretty pleased with, and now we can get back to really focusing on what we love doing, which is making music and performing and putting out more albums. Yeah.
Your song, you guys have been turning heads. Your songs have been turning heads. Not least of which, Ralph James, one of the biggest agents in the business, became a fan of you guys, signed on with you guys, have opened for the likes of like Tom Petty. But it all goes back to one original gig. I believe it was opening for Trooper, if I remember correctly. I'm sure you've told this story a million times, but it's interesting. From what I understand, this Midnight Shine wasn't meant to be a long-term project, so to speak. Can you just tell me a bit about that?
That's correct. We actually before the band was born, I used to go around and play a solo artist on my acoustic guitar. So, and that gig came up, and I was asked if I was interested in opening for Trooper in Timmins back in 2011, and I said absolutely. I've been a big fan of Trooper and love their music. And then the guy said, sure, well, the gig's yours, but you need a band. Yeah. And I said, well, I don't have a band. And he said, well, it's there if you want it. Yeah. So I had a few weeks to pull the band together. Yeah. And luckily I knew the other guys for quite some time. We've run into each other at different venues over the years, so it wasn't very hard for me to pull the other guys in. I first asked the drummer, former drummer, George Gillies, and he was close friends with the other two members in the band, and he pulled them in, and we got together for a couple of days in Timmins before the show. We weren't sure what we're going to do, if we were going to do covers or do some original stuff. I know I had quite a few originals done at the time that I had been performing and that they were aware of, so well, why don't we just do your originals? And we did that and did a couple covers, I believe. And I recall how quickly things kind of came together in the rehearsal, and I just found it really surprising how quickly the guys gelled and they all kind of said the same thing. This is just pretty fun, feels good, and we're having a good time. So we did the show. We put on a pretty good show for a band that just had rehearsed 2-3 days and had never played together before, and people were coming up to us for weeks after that, and I think it ended up landing us a few more shows that summer, that show itself. So we were riding that high for quite a while, and that's how the band started.
Where did music start for you? Like growing up in Attawapiskat, like what role did music have in your life growing up, and when did you begin writing songs?
Well, music has always been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. My mom played guitar, and she also played the organ, and I always, that was probably my earliest memories of being around it, music, is through my mom, and then a lot of the family, like my uncles and stuff like that, all played in the band. So I was always around it in one way or another. And music, I think music for me was always been an outlet. Growing up north, and it's kind of just a way out of the lifestyle up there, and it's for many years it was a hunter-gatherer type village, still is today. So when we were growing up, that was first and foremost, is get all those chores done, and there wasn't a whole lot of time for other things like music and arts stuff. So, but any chance I got, I definitely tried to pick up the guitar and play and listen to music, and even just goofing around, singing songs, writing songs. So yeah, I just started at a young age, and then in my teens I really started to get into playing more the guitar, and then I started exploring writing in maybe my late teens, early 20s.
What were your, like, with Midnight Shine, like, guys are a roots rock band, you display a lot of, typical, like, mainstream influences, but you also incorporate a lot of Indigenous influences as well into your music in kind of cool, innovative, and sometimes subtle ways. Was that always there from the beginning for you, a combination of mainstream interests and, traditional Indigenous influences, or was that a conscious thing later on to kind of bring those two together?
It was something that came later on, and earlier on I wanted to just make good music first and foremost, and I wanted to take a run at mainstream because I felt like, there was a place for me in mainstream, and I felt like I had, I was capable of breaking into that mainstream music, and then the other stuff sort of came later on, where I began to think about it more, and there were some influences there along the way, but mostly I tried to keep it very subtle. I think there are a lot of Indigenous artists that are out there now, that are really embracing their Indigenous background and bringing that full on into their music, and I just felt like I want to do something a little bit different.
You see that with someone like Jeremy Dutcher, very different style of music, but obviously won the Polaris Prize, and even for, like, historical Indigenous influences there. Like, anyways, the whole making of his album incorporated like historic recordings made of black cylinders and that, and he really wears it on his sleeve in a really kind of cool and innovative way. Is that the kind of thing that you're doing that in a different aspect, but is there more of a, I don't know what the right word is, just openness, willingness to do that and think that there will be an audience there for it among Indigenous artists than maybe there was 10, 15 years ago?
I think so. We're in an interesting time now with in the music industry, and I know there are more and more radio programmers beginning to kind of be more open to bringing in Indigenous artists into their mainstream or getting them into regular rotation. There are not enough out there now yet, but I mean, I think that the conversations are being had, and I think as an Indigenous artist, I'm always willing to voice that, because I know the challenges that I've had as a songwriter, and having 3 albums. A lot of my stuff doesn't get the radio play that it probably deserves, which I'm okay with, but I mean that is a challenge, I think, and I know there's a formula out there for commercial radio, and everybody's trying to write to that formula, to be able to get that next hit song or any song on the radio for all the right reasons. I think we want to have commercial success. We want to have that exposure, and the more people that we can reach with our music, the better it is for the artists and for everybody involved. But I think sometimes, personally, I know a couple times I've been called a rebel because, I'm kind of on the outside of that. I've been told anyway. At least I don't feel like I am, but I know that I want to make the kind of music that I feel like I want to make. So that's kind of the choice I made. Yeah.
We see more and more, like, I was talking to Don Amaro about this relatively recently, like, with folks like him, William Prince, A Tribe Called Red, Tanya Takak, Snotty Nose Res Kids, Jeremy Dutcher we were just talking about. And I know there's more that I'm forgetting, but it seems like across really all genres, Indigenous artists are being embraced, not only by audiences, but by the industry in a way, or maybe there's more doors open for them than there was before. Maybe on the industry level, you're talking a bit about it there when it comes to radio and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But have there been doors closed to Indigenous artists within the Canadian music industry, and are those opening or slowly opening?
Well, I can't say for sure that their doors have been closed. Particularly, I guess I can, speak from my own experience. I know I've been told that, we're just not in that headspace. Or we don't know what to do with you, and we wouldn't know where to put you. And those are the kinds of things that I've been told, and what those comments mean, I'm not really entirely sure. But I suspect it's because we're different, and maybe we don't quite have that mainstream sound that they're looking for. And it's not only with radio, but for publicity, looking for publicists or management, and those are the kinds of things people just are, I feel sometimes are not quite sure, what to do with. Again, speaking from my own experience, not quite sure to do with Midnight Shine, I suppose.
Cause you still live at Awapiskat. I know you have a camp up there. You're, take part in the harvest, the huts. You enjoy being out in, not just in the community, but even further into the desolate regions. Just like what, lyrically, it seems very apparent on High Road. Like you can hear it in a number of the songs. You're kind of writing what you're seeing in the far north. But just from you on a personal level, like how do you take inspiration from your surroundings when you're in places like that?
Well, there are a lot of different, I guess, inspirations that I draw from up there. Some being the land, the culture, people, family, love, just like any other artist. And of course, and then some of the experiences, whether they're good or bad. Attawapiskat, just like any other community, it has its good side and its bad side. So I write about all that stuff, and I try to put it in my music and express that through that art form.
A song like the last song on the album, I Need Angels, like you bring in a lot of the beauty of the community throughout the album, but that last song I know addresses the darker side of it too, and it's very personal to you. Like maybe so folks can go listen to it after they hear this interview. Can you kind of provide context of what that song is for you?
Yeah, well, it was a song that I felt like I needed to write, and going back about a year ago, I was sitting there in my little porch studio and trying to think of ideas and the stuff that I wanted to say and write about. And I know, the community had just been struggling with suicide crisis among the youth. There were kids, I think there was 1 a day, 2 a day, trying to take their own life, and I was just, I guess, thinking and trying to understand, why and what was going on, and how is this possible, and there's just a lot of questions coming to me at the time, I guess, and not really understanding why our young people were trying to end their lives. And and I began to kind of write about that because I've struggled with a lot of different things up there, and I know I've been in. There's been times in my life where I've struggled, and I started to write about those times, where I was struggling and how I was feeling, and then I tried to think about what they were feeling, and I tried to write about it, and I think the message in the I Need Angels is, we all need that help, and angels, I think for me, were always people in my life that came into my life, and whether it was my wife, my children, they're my angels, and they've always been my strength and power, and people that I've met that have always lifted me up. So I think the message I was trying to convey there was to go out and find those people, because they're there, and they're people that care and that do want to help, not only just in the community but outside the community as well. There are services that we can draw on when we need them. So yeah.
You have a pretty varied background. Like, you worked as a paramedic for 10 years. You're also CEO of the Economic Development. It's called the Economic Development Corporation for Attawapiskat, or I'm getting that name wrong. But you had a robust professional background before leaving that to pursue music full time. It's kind of two sides of this. But first, why that decision? 'Cause, God knows, anyone knows, it's hard to leave a lucrative job to pursue something that could be as risky as the music industry. So you must have wanted it pretty bad. But first, let's start with that. Like, what was the thinking behind that decision?
Well, okay, so yes, it was a crazy decision, and but I don't regret it. Well, not one bit. It's probably the best decision I ever made. I was, at the highest. Possible at the height of my career as CEO, and it was a very well-paying position, but there were a lot of things going on, in the community. The politics were just nasty, and everything, like not having the time off, never being away from work. When you're on vacation, you're getting calls and emails, and you have to respond when you have 300 people under your watch, so in different companies that you're responsible for. So it just came to a point where I was very unhappy, and I was starting to come out, in my everyday life. So I said it's time to move on, and I had nothing other than my music to fall back on, which doesn't pay very much, by the way. So, but I have like I said, like you said or mentioned earlier, I have a very robust background, and my wife wanted to start a business, so I helped her, and we managed to start a small business, and we also opened a pharmacy in the span of about a year and a half since I've left. So we're doing okay right now, but we're still working really, really hard. But yeah, to pursue music full time, that was one of the other decisions too, is to be able to have that flexibility to go up and tour, and it was becoming more and more difficult to get away from my job, and then to do both, to carry both roles is like very, very challenging too, right?
Is it not just musically but career-wise? I would imagine it gives you a different perspective than, say, like so many artists. Of course, they have to work day jobs to pay the bills and that kind of thing. But so, for so many of them, from the time they're teenagers on, like music's their focus, and that's what they want to do. And that's their be-all and end-all professionally, and everything else is just there to pay the bills. For you, having lived such a full professional life before leaving it to do this, do you come into it with a different? I know you can only speak from the perspective of your own life, but still, do you think you come into it from a different perspective than an artist who hasn't had that?
Yeah, I definitely come at it with, I have a business background, and I've always said that when you get up on that stage and you put that 1 hour show together, I think that's only one very small part of what artists do and what's involved in that, the music industry. It's a big ugly machine with a lot of moving parts, and a big part of that is business. And I think because of the background and the experience that I had and the life experience, and all the ups and downs. I think I probably a lot more prepared than somebody who hasn't had that type of a background, and understanding the importance of having a team and make and delegating some of that work to the other team members, and surrounding myself with the right people, the people who believe in my vision and my goals, and having a strategy, and what are we going to do in the next year, what are we going to do in the next 3 years. Those are the kind of things that I learned while I worked in business, and I try to apply that with music as well.
One of those people on your team, like I mentioned earlier, is Ralph James, the agent, probably one of the biggest agents in the Canadian music industry. How did you guys connect with Ralph, and essentially what impact has he had since he signed with them?
Well, Ralph came into the picture about back in 2014, I would say, and we had met him through our manager, Rosanna Schick, and they knew each other years back, and still were in contact and in touch throughout the years in the music side of things. And so she approached him at one event and asked him if she would listen to a CD, our first album, and he did, and he immediately was interested in knowing more about the band. So that relationship took at least 3 years to develop with Ralph, and I know that the industry is built on relationships, and so it does. I mean, you have to know the right people, and I think you can work hard and you can have all the talent, but if you don't know the right people, it's going to be a lot more difficult to advance in this career.
And I guess two other people in your camp now are the co-producers, or the two producers, fly getting up in our faces, the two producers on High Road. One who I believe produced 2/3 of the album, John-Angus MacDonald of the Trews, and the other, Tim, I'm forgetting Tim's last name, is it Vesely? Vesely from the Rheostatics. First, how did you connect with those two guys individually, and essentially what impact did they have on the album?
Yeah, well, I'll speak to Tim Vesely first. We had met with Jim Cuddy through Juno Cup. I played in 2 Juno Cups, last year and the year before, and I got to meet Jim Cuddy for the first time. And
for folks who maybe aren't sure, that's the hockey game that goes on between the players and ex-NHLers during Juno Week.
That's right. Yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big game, and I was honored to be a part of it the last 2 years, and I got to meet some, a lot of people that I've never dreamt of ever meeting in my entire life, both on the NHL side and also on the musician side. So it was such a great experience. But that's kind of where it all started. And we were interested in working with obviously Jim Cuddy, but we ended up he's so busy, he has no time in his schedule, so we ended up working with Tim Vesely, who's the in-house producer there at the Woodshed. So that's how we met, and my Rosanna, our manager, Chase, sat down. And he was wonderful to work with, just really easygoing, down-to-earth guy, and a lot of experience. He's a performing musician for, 30 years, somewhat.
It's been around forever, it seems.
Yeah, a lot of producing experience. So very capable guy. So we were pretty fortunate to be able to work with him. And then, of course, John-Angus, we met through Ralph James, our agent. They were the same agent. And there were a few others that were in the mix as well. A couple of other producers that were very, very interested in working with us, and we met with all of them. And we went with for the bulk of the album, we went with John-Angus. I think it was the outcome was positive. We couldn't be more happy with how things turned out. And me as an artist and having creative control over a lot of my music felt really good to me.
Part of what I wanted to ask about is, as a songwriter, because I know the artist producer dynamic, but particularly between the guy whoever's in the band, that's typically the songwriter and the producer. It can go a lot of ways. Some songwriters want a really collaborative producer who really kind of puts their own, fingerprint on the songs, and other people want a producer that's more kind of out of the way, I suppose. What kind of relationship were you looking for, and did you end up having with those guys on a artistic front?
Well, I was mostly just, producing. That's what I was hoping to get out of it from both Tim and John-Angus. And sometimes it works out that way, but it's also almost impossible, I guess, to not get into, a lyric change here and there. But then when you start doing that, becomes technically becomes co-writes beyond, just arranging songs and producing. So I mean, it ended up being exactly what I would hope for. Like there was no pressure for me to have to open up, the songs for co-writing, and they were very respectful of that, and they thought the songs that were there were fairly strong, and the writing was very very strong, and there was just a few things here and there that we may have made some changes to as a group, and there were some ideas that were brought in from some of the other people we were working with too. So, and if it's going to make the song better and bring the song even more to life, you can't shut the door. Like I felt like, I can't shut the door on that. It's great, we're going to do it. We're going to keep it, and then again that opens the door to having co-write. But it was a great experience. Yeah.
Before we wrap up here, I just want to ask about the logistics of being, because God knows being a touring band, the logistics of being a touring band can be a nightmare for even people that live in the same city, let alone who live in different fly-in only communities. So just like how can you guys, just to lay it out there, like how can you guys tour and actually for it to make financial sense? Know what I mean?
Well, it's very, very difficult to launch a band, let alone out of Wapiskat, the far north, Canada's far north. But again, to not have the members living in the same city or community is even more challenging, because we never play together. The only time we played together is for shows, and we do rehearse. And if we're coming to Toronto, we try to get here a few days early if we're going to do a show here, to shake the rust, right? Yeah. And the first day is usually pretty awful, and then the second day it starts to come together again. Like the very first time we played, it just happens really, just naturally, and we gel really quickly. I don't know what it is, but I mean the other guys make it easy too, right? They're great musicians. They're for the most part fun to play with and be around. We haven't tried to strangle each other yet. We get along fairly good, so. We definitely would love to be in the same location for once and spend time writing and rehearsing and working on the live show. And there's so much more that we could be doing, but because we don't live in the same communities, we just don't have that ability to really work on the live show and continue to write and collaborate together as a group. But we are going to make plans to try to be together more for the purpose of collaboration, and hopefully start building our continue to build our live act. I know I'm really wanting to, I have a vision of where I want to take the live show, and I want to give people an experience they won't forget. So we're kind of working towards it. It's far off in the distance somewhere, but I see it and we're working towards it. Yeah.
And so many artists that are from not even places nearly as remote as where you're from, but say a band from like Moose Jaw or just wherever. A lot of bands, when they reach that point in their career where they can do it financially and where music is their full-time focus, go to one of the main urban centers, whether it's Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, maybe even Calgary, or if you're out east, sometimes Halifax, because it just makes a lot of things in your career easier and allows you to pursue a lot of things easy in a just easier way, I guess. Is that something you would ever consider, or is Wapiskat just too close and important to you to leave?
Well, I've, if I could support, myself in Toronto or somewhere near Toronto, I would uproot my family and relocate for sure. If it meant if that meant advancing Midnight Shine, absolutely, I would do it.
God knows, for anybody living with 4 kids in Toronto is is a hard thing financially.
Yeah, they're like, I always describe the kids are like a pack of wolves, feeding a pack of wolves. Never satisfied.
So like I mentioned in the, I believe, is it tomorrow or the day after, you guys are filming some stuff for the CBC, and other than that, what else is on the on the horizon or in the near future for the band?
Well, we got a couple of shows. We're doing actually one show before Christmas. We're going into one of the communities up north to do I guess part of their Christmas concert, and we're going to do a full set, an hour set for them there. So we're going to be doing a bit of rehearsal for that, and there's really not a whole lot else going on throughout the winter. Winter is usually pretty slow for us. So we're hoping to have a bigger festival season this summer, and we're certainly working as hard as we can as artists to be the best we can, for everybody else to be able to market the band.
Adrian, thanks a lot for doing this for folks. Check out Midnight Shine. Latest album is High Road. 2 previous albums, the self-titled and Northern Man. And Adrian, this has been a pleasure. Thanks a lot, man.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.